My name is Jake and I'm 40 years old now. For 15 years, I worked as a tractor driver on a dusty farm in Kansas, where the wheat fields stretch endlessly toward the horizon and the sun beats down mercilessly on everything it touches. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work and I took pride in it. Every morning at dawn, I'd climb into that old John Deere and spend my days cutting straight lines through golden grain, the engine's steady rumble becoming as familiar as my own heartbeat. Linda was my wife of 12 years. She managed the farm's kitchen, feeding the seasonal workers and keeping the books for the small restaurant we ran on the side. She had auburn hair that caught the light just right, and when she smiled, her whole face would light up. At least, that's how I remember her from the early days. We'd met at a county fair when I was 25 and she was 23. She was selling homemade pies at a booth, and I bought 3 just to have an excuse to keep talking to her. Those were good times. We'd sit on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, talking about our dreams of maybe expanding the farm, maybe having kids someday. Linda would rest her head on my shoulder, and I'd think about how lucky I was to have found someone who understood the quiet beauty of this life. But somewhere along the way things started to change. Maybe it was the isolation getting to her, or maybe it was just the sameness of each day bleeding into the next. Linda started complaining more about the dust, about how there was nothing to do, nowhere to go. She'd sigh when she looked out at the fields, like they were prison bars instead of our livelihood. Then Bill arrived. He was the new grain hauler, probably 35, with one of those easy smiles that made everyone feel like his best friend. He had a newer truck than most of the other drivers, painted bright red with chrome that caught the sunlight. Bill would show up twice a week to collect our grain shipments, and somehow those routine transactions started taking longer and longer. At first I didn't think much of it. Linda had always been friendly with the workers and drivers. It was part of what made her good at running the kitchen operation. But I started noticing things. Little things at first. The way she'd laugh at Bill's jokes, even the ones that weren't particularly funny. How she'd find excuses to be outside when his truck pulled up, even if she'd been busy with kitchen work moments before. She started wearing her good blouse more often, the blue one that brought out her eyes even on regular work days. "Bill's got some interesting stories," she'd say over dinner. "Did you know he's been all over the country? He's seen places I've only read about in magazines." I'd nod and grunt something non-committal, my attention supposedly focused on my plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. But inside, something was starting to twist. The changes were gradual enough that I told myself I was imagining things. Linda had always been curious about the world beyond our farm. There was nothing wrong with her being interested in Bill's travels, was there? Nothing suspicious about her staying late to check the inventory, or balance the books, when he was around. But the staying late became more frequent. She'd be in the farm office, supposedly working on paperwork, long after I'd finished my evening chores and settled in front of the television. When I'd call out that I was heading to bed, she'd respond that she'd be just another few minutes, but those minutes stretched into hours. One evening in late July, the heat still radiating from the earth even after sunset, I decided to bring her a glass of iced tea. The office was in a converted barn about 50 yards from the house, and as I walked across the yard, I could see the lights still on inside. I was about 10 feet from the door when I heard voices. Linda's laugh, bright and musical in a way I hadn't heard in months. And Bill's deeper chuckle in response. I stopped walking. They were talking about something I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was intimate. Not the casual friendliness of business associates, but something warmer, more personal. I stood there in the darkness, holding that sweating glass of tea, feeling like an intruder in my own life. After a few minutes, I turned around and walked back to the house. I set the tea on the kitchen counter and went to bed, staring at the ceiling until Linda finally came in around midnight, moving quietly like she was trying not to wake me. "How'd the books look?" I asked in the darkness. She jumped slightly. "Oh, I thought you were asleep." "They're fine. Just had to reconcile some discrepancies in the grain invoices." But her voice had that careful quality it got when she was choosing her words too precisely. The next few weeks were torture. I found myself paying attention to every interaction, every glance, every seemingly innocent comment. I'd catch Linda looking out the window when Bill's truck approached, and she'd have this expression I couldn't quite read. Anticipation maybe. Or something that looked suspiciously like joy. I started making excuses to be around during Bill's visits. Suddenly I needed to check the grain bins right when he arrived, or I had to discuss something urgent about the next harvest schedule. Bill was always polite to me, friendly even, but there was something in his eyes when he looked at Linda that made my stomach clench. During one of these orchestrated encounters, I overheard part of their conversation. "You're wasted out here, Linda," Bill was saying, leaning against his truck's tailgate. Someone with your smarts, your organizational skills? There are opportunities in the city. Real opportunities. Oh, I don't know, Linda replied, but she didn't sound dismissive. She sounded interested. I've never lived anywhere but small towns. That's exactly why you should try it. Life's too short to spend it all in one place, don't you think? I turned away before I could hear her response, but the conversation echoed in my head for days. That weekend, Linda announced she was going into town to visit her sister Margaret. She'd be gone Saturday afternoon and evening, maybe staying over if it got too late. This wasn't unusual, she and Margaret were close, but something about the way she mentioned it felt off. Saturday came and she left around noon, dressed nicer than usual for a casual visit. I spent the day working on some equipment maintenance trying to keep busy, but my mind kept wandering. Around 4 o'clock, I decided to drive into town to pick up some parts one needed from the hardware store. Town was small enough that you'd typically see familiar cars parked along Main Street, and I automatically scanned for Linda's little Honda Civic as I drove through. I didn't see it anywhere near Margaret's house, but I did notice Bill's red truck parked behind Mickey's diner on the edge of town. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I should have driven home. Should have minded my own business and trusted my wife. Instead, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the gas station across the street, positioning my truck where I had a clear view of the diner. I sat there for nearly an hour, feeling like the worst kind of fool before Linda and Bill emerged from the diner. They weren't holding hands or anything obviously inappropriate, but they stood close together by his truck, talking intently about something. At one point, Bill reached out and touched her arm and Linda didn't pull away. They talked for another 10 minutes before Linda got into her car and Bill climbed into his truck. They drove off in opposite directions and I sat there alone in the gas station parking lot, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. When Linda came home that evening, she seemed relaxed and happy, talking about Margaret's new job and the gossip from town. She didn't mention running into Bill and I didn't ask. But that night, as she slept beside me, I stared at her face in the dim light filtering through the curtains and wondered how long she'd been lying to me. More importantly, I wondered what I was going to do about it. The answer came 2 weeks later, in the form of a piece of paper that fluttered out of Linda's purse when she was digging around for her car keys. I picked it up without thinking and the words hit me like a physical blow. Meet me at the old grain elevator on Miller Road tonight at 10. We need to talk about the job offer. B. The job offer. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket, my hands surprisingly steady. When Linda asked if I'd seen a piece of paper fall out of her purse, I shook my head and suggested she check the kitchen counter. That evening, I told Linda I was going to bed early, said I had a headache. Instead, I waited until she left the house around 9:30, claiming she needed to run to the store for milk, and then I followed her. The old grain elevator on Miller Road had been abandoned for 5 years, standing like a concrete monument to better times. It was about 2 miles from our farm, tucked away from the main roads. As I approached, I could see 2 vehicles parked in the shadows, Linda's Honda and Bill's truck. I parked a safe distance away and walked closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could see them through the truck's windshield, sitting close together, talking. From where I stood, partially hidden behind some old equipment, I could catch fragments of their conversation when the wind was right. "Can't keep doing this," Linda was saying. I know, but the position in Denver is perfect for you. My cousin owns the logistics company, and he's looking for someone to run the office operations. You'd be great at it. Denver. That was 800 miles away. But Jake. Linda's voice was soft, conflicted. Linda, you've been unhappy for years. You've told me so yourself. This life, this place, it's not what you want. You know it isn't. There was a long silence and then Linda spoke again, so quietly I had to strain to hear. I do care about him. I really do. But you're right. I am unhappy. I have been for a long time. So come with me. Start over. You deserve to be happy. It would break his heart. Hearts heal. But regret lasts forever. I'd heard enough. More than enough. I walked back to my truck on unsteady legs and drove home, taking a longer route so I wouldn't risk running into Linda on her way back. When she came through the door 20 minutes later with a gallon of milk and an explanation about how the store had been crowded, I was sitting in my chair, staring at the television without seeing anything on the screen. "How's your headache?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "Better," I lied. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of normal life, getting up early, working the fields, eating dinner with my wife, watching the evening news together. But inside, I felt hollow, like someone had reached into my chest and scooped out everything essential. I kept waiting for Linda to say something, to bring up Denver or job opportunities or dissatisfaction with our life. But she acted completely normal, maybe even a little extra affectionate, as if she was trying to compensate for something. On Thursday evening I couldn't take it anymore. "Linda," I said during a commercial break in the program we'd been pretending to watch, "are you happy here?" She looked startled by the directness of the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean here. With me. With this life we've built." For a moment I thought she might tell me the truth. Her face went through several expressions: surprise, guilt, something that might have been relief. But then her features settled into careful neutrality. "Of course I am. Why would you ask that?" I pulled the note from my pocket and set it on the coffee table between us. Linda stared at it like it was a snake that might strike. Her face went pale, then flushed red. "Jake, I can explain. Are you in love with him?" The question hung in the air between us, and in the silence that followed I got my answer. It's not that simple," she whispered. "It seems pretty simple to me. Either you love me and want to be here, or you love him and want to be somewhere else." Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "I never meant for this to happen. Bill and I, we talked a lot, and he understands things about me that maybe you don't." "What things?" "How trapped I feel sometimes. How I wonder what else is out there." "You love this life, Jake. You love the farm, the routine, the simplicity of it all. But I've been dying here little by little for years." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you talk to me about feeling trapped?" "Because I knew you'd want to fix it, and the only way to fix it would be to leave, and you'd never be happy anywhere else. This is who you are, Jake. This place, this work, it's part of you. And I love that about you, I really do. But it's not who I am." We talked until nearly sunrise, going in circles, crying, sometimes raising our voices, sometimes speaking so quietly we could barely hear each other. By the end of it, we both knew what had to happen. Linda was offered the job in Denver. Bill had put in a good word for her with his cousin, and they wanted her to start as soon as possible. She would take it. We would get divorced. The conversation about the practical details was almost businesslike in its efficiency. Linda would take her car and her personal belongings. I would keep the farm and everything else. We'd split our modest savings account. She would file for divorce once she was established in Colorado, citing irreconcilable differences. "I'm sorry, Jake," she said as dawn was breaking over the wheat fields. "I'm so sorry." "I know you are," I replied, and I meant it. Despite everything, I could see that she was genuinely torn up about hurting me. "I'm sorry too." "For what?" "For not being enough to make you want to stay." She started crying again then, and for a moment I thought about taking it all back, about begging her to stay and promising we could figure something out. But I didn't. Because deep down I knew she was right. I loved this life, this place, this simple existence. And if she needed something more, something different, then keeping her here would just be prolonging both of our suffering. Linda left on a Tuesday morning in September. She packed her clothes and a few personal items into her Honda, and Bill followed her in his truck to help with the drive and to make sure she got settled safely. At least that's what they told me. I suspected it was the beginning of whatever they'd been building together, but by then it didn't matter anymore. I stood in the driveway and watched her car disappear down the long gravel road that led to the highway. After 12 years of marriage, that's how it ended. Not with screaming or dramatics, but with the quiet sound of an engine fading into the distance. The first few months alone were rough. The farmhouse felt enormous and empty, and I found myself cooking single portions of meals and eating them standing up at the kitchen counter rather than sitting at the table we'd shared for so many years. I threw myself into work, staying out in the fields until well after dark, coming home exhausted enough to fall straight into bed. The divorce was finalized in December. Linda sent the papers back signed, along with a letter that I read once and then put away in my desk drawer. She said she was doing well, that the job was everything she'd hoped it would be, that Denver was exciting and full of possibilities. She also said she missed me, missed parts of our life together, and hoped someday I could forgive her. I wasn't sure about forgiveness yet, but I was working on it. By spring I'd made a decision that surprised even me. I sold the farm to a corporate agriculture company that had been making offers for years. The money was enough to buy a small house in town and set myself up with a new life. I opened a small auto repair shop, something I'd always been good at but never had time to pursue seriously while farming. It turned out there was plenty of demand for honest, reliable car repair in our little town, and I found that I enjoyed the work. Each day brought different problems to solve, different challenges to tackle. It was still working with my hands, still honest work, but it was different enough from farming that it felt like a fresh start. The shop kept me busy and gradually I started building a new routine. I'd work until 5 or 6, clean up, and then head over to Murphy's bar for dinner and a beer. I got to know some of the regulars, started playing pool on Thursday nights, even went on a few dates with a teacher named Sarah who seemed to appreciate my quiet way of looking at the world. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a good life. About 18 months after Linda left, I ran into Margaret at the grocery store. We made small talk for a few minutes before she brought up her sister. "Have you heard from Linda lately?" she asked, with the careful tone people use when they're not sure if a topic is safe. "Not since the divorce was finalized," I said. "How is she doing?" Margaret's expression was complicated. "Well, she's having some challenges." "What kind of challenges?" "The job didn't work out the way she expected. The company downsized about 6 months ago and she was one of the first to be let go. She's been struggling to find something comparable." I felt a pang of something. Not quite satisfaction but not sympathy either. "What about Bill?" Margaret's face darkened. "That didn't work out either. Turns out he was married the whole time. His wife found out about Linda and, well, let's just say it got messy. Linda had to move out of the apartment they were sharing and find her own place. She's been working at a restaurant to make ends meet." I absorbed this information quietly. "She asks about you sometimes," Margaret continued. "Wonders how you're doing, if you're happy." "What do you tell her?" "That you seem to be doing well. That you have your own business now and appear to be moving forward." I nodded. "That's accurate, Jake." Margaret hesitated. "I think she might be interested in coming back. Not necessarily to try to rebuild what you had, but just back home. She's been talking about how much she misses the simplicity of small-town life, how overwhelming the city can be." "That's her decision to make," I said. "But if she's looking for things to go back to the way they were, that's not going to happen." "I know. I think she knows that too." We finished our conversation and went our separate ways, but Margaret's words stayed with me for weeks afterward. I found myself wondering what I would do if Linda did come back to town, how I would feel seeing her again, whether there were any lingering feelings that might complicate my carefully rebuilt life. The answer came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday afternoon in late spring when I looked up from the engine I was working on to see a familiar figure standing in the doorway of my shop. Linda looked older, thinner than I remembered, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her hair was shorter, and she was dressed in jeans and a simple blouse instead of the stylish clothes she'd favored during those last months on the farm. "Hello, Jake," she said quietly. "Linda." I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over to where she stood. "Margaret said you might be coming back. I got in yesterday. I'm staying with her for now, trying to figure out what comes next." We looked at each other for a long moment, and I was surprised to find that I felt calm. No anger, no hurt, no rekindled romance. Just calm. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm doing well. Really well, actually. How about you?" She smiled ruefully. "I've been better. But I'm learning things about myself, I guess. About what actually matters. Such as the fact that running away from problems doesn't solve them. And that the grass isn't always greener, even when it really seems like it should be." I nodded. "Those are hard lessons." "Yes, they are." She looked around the shop, taking in the organized tools, the clean workspace, the certificates on the wall from various automotive training courses I'd completed. "This is nice, Jake. Really nice. You seem happy here." "I'm happy here. It took some time to get there, but I am. I'm glad. I was worried that I'd ruined your ability to trust people, to build something new." "You hurt me," I said honestly. "But you didn't ruin me." And honestly, as much as it sucked at the time, I think we both needed to go through what we went through to figure out who we really were. Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I made such a mess of everything. I was so sure that leaving was the answer, that Bill was the answer, that a different life was the answer. But all I really did was trade one set of problems for another set of problems." "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know yet. Margaret says there might be an opening at the school district office. It wouldn't be glamorous, but it would be steady, and it would let me be close to family again. I think maybe I need steady for a while." "That sounds like a good plan." She hesitated, then asked, Do you think we could be friends? Someday, I mean. Not right away, but eventually?" I considered the question seriously. "Maybe. I think we'd both need some more time to figure out who we are as separate people. But maybe, eventually." She nodded, looking relieved. "I'd like that. I'd like to think that something good could come out of all this mess." "Something good already did come out of it," I said. "We both learned who we really are and what we actually want. That's worth something. Linda left after a few more minutes of conversation, and I went back to work on the engine I'd been repairing. But I found myself thinking about our conversation for the rest of the day. She was right that she'd made a mess of things. The way she'd gone about leaving, the secrecy, the betrayal, all of that had been painful and unnecessary. But she was also right that we'd both learned important things about ourselves. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd thought, more adaptable than I'd given myself credit for. I'd learned that I could build a new life from scratch and find happiness in unexpected places. And I'd learned that love, real love, wasn't about holding on to someone who wanted to be somewhere else. As for Linda, well, it sounded like she'd learned that the problem hadn't been our life together so much as her own restlessness and dissatisfaction. That was a hard lesson and an expensive one, but it was hers to learn. Over the following months, I'd see Linda around town occasionally. She did get the job with the school district, and she seemed to be settling into a quieter, more grounded version of the life she'd rejected years earlier. We'd nod to each other politely when our paths crossed, but we didn't seek each other out. I continued building my business and my new life. Sarah and I kept seeing each other casually, and while it never developed into anything serious, we enjoyed each other's company. I joined the volunteer fire department, started coaching Little League on weekends, and generally became more involved in the community than I'd ever been when I was farming. One day, about a year after Linda had returned to town, I was having lunch at the diner when she approached my table. "Mind if I sit down?" she asked. "Not at all." She slid into the booth across from me and we sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "I wanted to thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For handling everything with so much grace. For not making things harder than they had to be. For letting me figure out my own mistakes without rubbing my face in them." "You're welcome, I guess. Though I'm not sure I had much choice in the matter." "You had lots of choices. You could have fought me on the divorce, made demands, tried to sabotage my job opportunities, spread gossip around town when things went badly for me. But you didn't do any of that. What would have been the point? Making you miserable wouldn't have made me happy." She smiled. "That's exactly what I mean. You're a good man, Jake. I hope you know that." "I'm trying to be." "Are you seeing anyone?" Casually. "Nothing serious yet, but I'm open to it." "Good. You deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who appreciates what you have to offer." "So do you," I said and meant it. She looked surprised. "Even after everything?" "Everyone deserves happiness, Linda. Even people who make mistakes while they're looking for it." We talked for another few minutes, and when she got up to leave, something felt different between us. Not romantic, not like we were going to try again, but settled, somehow. Like we'd finally put the past to rest and could both move forward without dragging old hurt and resentment behind us. That was 3 years ago now. Linda is still working at the school district and seems to have found a kind of peace with small-town life that had eluded her before. She's been dating a widowed teacher for about 6 months, and they seem happy together. Sometimes I'll see them at community events and we'll exchange friendly greetings. As for me, I married Sarah last summer. It turns out that what I'd mistaken for casual dating was actually the slow, steady growth of something deeper. She's different from Linda, more content, more accepting of life as it comes. She loves the smell of motor oil on my hands and doesn't mind that I'm not ambitious in the traditional sense. We built a small addition onto my house, and she moved in her 2 cats and a collection of romance novels that now takes up half our bedroom. It's a quiet life, a simple life, but it's genuinely happy in a way that I'm not sure I ever was during those last years with Linda. There's no underlying tension, no sense that anyone is settling or making sacrifices they resent. We're both exactly where we want to be, with exactly who we want to be with. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Linda had talked to me honestly about her unhappiness instead of turning to Bill. Maybe we could have worked something out, found a compromise, saved our marriage. But I don't dwell on those thoughts much anymore. The truth is, we weren't right for each other in the long term. We wanted different things from life, and neither of us was wrong for wanting what we wanted. Linda needed adventure, change, the excitement of new possibilities. I needed stability, routine, the satisfaction of work well done. For a while, we thought we could bridge that gap with love, but love alone isn't always enough. Now we're both with people who share our fundamental outlook on life, and we're both happier for it. The betrayal hurt, it hurt a lot and for a long time. But looking back, I can see that it was also a gift of sorts. It forced us both to be honest about what we really wanted, instead of just going through the motions of a life that wasn't working for either of us. I still drive past the old farm sometimes, just to see how it's doing under corporate management. They've made changes, bigger equipment, more efficient systems, modern grain storage facilities. It's probably more profitable now than it ever was when I ran it, but it's also lost something ineffable, some sense of being connected to the people who work it. I don't miss the backbreaking labor or the financial stress, but I do miss the feeling of being part of something larger than myself, of participating in the ancient cycle of planting and harvest that connects us to every generation of farmers who came before. Still, I wouldn't go back. This life I've built, this second chance I've been given, it's exactly what I need. My shop is busy enough to keep me challenged, but not so busy that I can't take time off when Sarah wants to visit her daughter in Oklahoma or when the volunteer fire department needs extra hands for a community event. We have a good marriage, built on friendship and mutual respect as much as romance. We laugh together, work together in the garden she planted behind the house, and settle in each evening to read or watch television with a contentment that I'd forgotten was possible. It's not the life I planned when I was 25 and falling in love with a girl who sold pies at the county fair. But it's a good life, an honest life, a life that fits me like a comfortable old shirt. And Linda? From what I hear through the small-town grapevine, she's found her own version of contentment. It turns out that what she'd been looking for wasn't really adventure or excitement. It was just the feeling of being appreciated for who she was, rather than who someone else wanted her to be. The teacher she's dating, his name is Robert, lost his wife to cancer 5 years ago and understands something about starting over. He seems to value Linda's intelligence and organizational skills, and more importantly, he doesn't seem to expect her to be anything other than exactly who she is. Sometimes I think about how different things might have been if Bill had never shown up with his talk of opportunities and his promises of a bigger, better life. But then I remember that Linda was unhappy long before Bill arrived. He was just the catalyst, not the cause. And maybe that's the real lesson in all of this. That happiness isn't something someone else can give you or take away from you. It's something you have to build for yourself, with choices you make every day about how to respond to whatever life throws at you. Linda chose to leave to chase something she thought she wanted, and she learned some hard truths about herself in the process. I chose to let her go, to rebuild my life from scratch, and I learned that I was capable of more than I'd given myself credit for. Neither path was easy, but both led us to where we needed to be. Now, when I look back on those difficult months when my marriage was falling apart, I feel something close to gratitude. Not for the pain, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but for the growth that came out of it, for the clarity it forced me to find, for the life it eventually led me to. I'm 46 now, married to a woman who loves me exactly as I am, running a business that brings me satisfaction every day, and part of a community that values what I have to contribute. It's not a perfect life, no life is, but it's mine, built on my own choices and shaped by my own values. And that, I've learned, is enough. More than enough, actually. It's everything. But life has a way of bringing things full circle, sometimes in ways you never expect. Last month, on a particularly busy Saturday at the shop, I was under the hood of Mrs. Henderson's old Buick when I heard Sarah call out from the front office. "Jake, there's someone here to see you." I wiped my hands and walked toward the front, expecting to see another customer with a broken-down vehicle. Instead, I found myself face to face with Bill. He looked older than I remembered, grayer around the temples, with lines etched deep around his eyes. His clothes were clean but worn, and there was something in his posture that spoke of hard times. The cocky confidence that had once made him so appealing to Linda was nowhere to be seen. "Jake," he said, his voice uncertain. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by." Sarah looked between us, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. I introduced them briefly, then suggested Bill and I step outside to talk. We stood by his truck, the same red truck, though it looked like it had seen better days, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "I owe you an apology," Bill finally said. "A big one." "Okay," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "What I did, what Linda and I did, it was wrong. There's no excuse for it. I should have walked away the moment I realized she was married, and I definitely shouldn't have encouraged her to leave you." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but all I saw was genuine regret. "What brings you back here, Bill? Last I heard, you were in Denver." He let out a bitter laugh. "Denver didn't work out so well for me. Turns out my ex-wife now, had some friends there who made sure word got around about what kind of man I was. Lost my job, lost most of my friends, lost just about everything that mattered." "I'm sorry to hear that." He looked surprised by my response. "Are you? Really? Nobody deserves to lose everything, even people who make bad choices." Bill stared at the ground for a long moment. "You're a better man than I am, Jake. Always were." Linda knew it too toward the end. She used to talk about you, about how decent you were, how guilty she felt about what we were doing. If she felt guilty, why didn't she stop? Because she was unhappy and I convinced her that the problem was her life instead of helping her figure out how to fix what was wrong. I was selfish. I wanted her, and I told myself that meant I should have her, regardless of the cost to you or to her. This conversation wasn't going the way I'd expected. What happened between you two, if you don't mind me asking? She figured out pretty quickly that I wasn't the solution to her problems. We lasted about 8 months before she realized that I was just another version of being stuck, except this time she was stuck with someone who'd proven he couldn't be trusted. Bill kicked at a small stone in the parking lot. The thing is, Jake, Linda never stopped loving you. Even when she was with me, even when she was trying to convince herself that leaving was the right choice, she never stopped loving you. She was just confused about what love meant, about what it was supposed to look like. Why are you telling me this? Because I heard you got remarried and I wanted you to know that what happened between Linda and me, it wasn't about you not being enough. You were always enough. The problem was that Linda didn't know how to be happy with enough, and I made that worse instead of better. I thought about his words for a moment. Are you in touch with Linda now? No, we haven't spoken in over 2 years. But I keep tabs on people sometimes, you know? Small town networks and all that. I heard she's doing better, found some peace. She has. We're actually on friendly terms now. Not close, but friendly. Bill nodded. That's good. That's really good. She always hoped you two could get to that place eventually. What about you? What are you doing now? Driving truck again, but for a different company. Smaller routes, mostly local stuff. I'm based out of Topeka now, trying to rebuild my reputation one job at a time. He paused. I also started going to counseling, trying to figure out why I made the choices I made. Turns out I've got some patterns I needed to break. That takes courage. Does it? Sometimes it feels more like desperation. Like I finally ran out of ways to mess up my life and had to try something different. We talked for a few more minutes about inconsequential things. The weather, changes in the trucking industry, mutual acquaintances we'd both lost touch with. But the important conversation was over. Bill had said what he'd come to say and I'd heard it. As he was getting ready to leave, he turned back to me one more time. Jake, I know this is probably too much to ask, but do you think you could ever forgive me? I considered the question seriously. 2 years ago, even 1 year ago, I might have said no. But standing there in my shop's parking lot, looking at this broken-down version of the man who had once seemed to have everything I lacked, I found that the anger I'd carried for so long had somehow transformed into something closer to pity. I think I already have, I said, and realized as I spoke the words that they were true. Bill's face crumpled with relief. Thank you. You don't know what that means to me. After he drove away, I stood in the parking lot for a while, processing what had just happened. Sarah came out to check on me, slipping her arm through mine. Old friend? She asked gently. Not exactly. More like an old complication that just got resolved. She didn't push for details, which was one of the many things I loved about her. Sarah understood that everyone comes with a past, and she trusted me to share what I needed to share when I was ready. That evening, over dinner, I told her about Bill's visit and what he'd said about Linda never stopping loving me. Sarah listened without jealousy or insecurity, the way she listened to everything, with genuine interest and acceptance. How do you feel about that? She asked when I'd finished. Complicated, I guess. Sad for Linda that she was so unhappy but couldn't figure out how to fix it. Sad for Bill that he spent the last few years paying for one series of bad decisions. But also, grateful maybe? Grateful? If Linda had been happy in our marriage, if she'd never left, I never would have ended up here. With you, with this life we've built. And I can't imagine being anywhere else now. Sarah smiled and reached across the table to take my hand. I can't imagine you anywhere else either. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, Sarah brought up something that surprised me. Have you ever thought about reaching out to Linda? Not to rekindle anything, she added quickly, but just to let her know that you've found peace with everything that happened? Why would you suggest that? Because from what you've told me, she's probably still carrying guilt about how things ended. And you've clearly found a way to let go of the anger. Maybe she deserves to know that you're not just okay, but truly happy. I thought about Sarah's suggestion for several days. The idea of initiating contact with Linda felt strange, but not necessarily wrong. We'd exchanged pleasantries in public, but we'd never had a real conversation about everything that had happened, never acknowledged how we'd both grown and changed. Finally, I decided to write her a letter. Not a long one, just a few paragraphs to let her know what Bill had told me and to assure her that I bore her no ill will. I also wanted her to know that I was happy, genuinely happy, and that I hoped she was too. I mailed the letter on a Tuesday and tried to put it out of my mind. But 3 days later, Linda called the shop. "Jake," she said when I answered the phone. "I got your letter. I hope that was okay." I wasn't sure if it was more than okay. It was exactly what I needed to hear. Her voice was thick with emotion. "I've been carrying so much guilt, so much regret about how everything happened. I knew you'd moved on, but I wasn't sure if you'd ever really forgiven me." "I have. Completely." "Bill visited you?" "A few weeks ago. He seemed like a different person than the man I remembered." "He is a different person. We both are, I think. What we did, the way we handled everything, it was wrong, Jake. I know that now. I knew it then too, but I convinced myself that my unhappiness justified it. We all make mistakes when we're trying to figure out what we want from life. Some mistakes hurt other people more than others. True. But some mistakes also lead to growth, to better choices, to becoming the person you were meant to be. I think that's what happened for all of us." Linda was quiet for a moment. "Your wife Sarah sounds wonderful. Margaret speaks very highly of her. She is wonderful. We're very happy together." "I'm so glad. You deserve happiness, Jake. You always did. So do you, Linda. I hope you know that." "I'm learning to believe it. Robert helps with that. He's very different from both you and Bill, but in good ways. He doesn't try to fix me or change me or convince me to be someone else. He just likes me as I am. That's how it should be." We talked for a few more minutes, but it felt like we'd said everything that needed saying. When we hung up, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't even realized I'd been missing. That weekend, Sarah and I drove out to the lake for a picnic. As we sat on a blanket watching the sunset, I found myself thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal that had felt like the end of the world had actually been the beginning of something better. "Penny for your thoughts," Sarah said, leaning against my shoulder. "Just thinking about how funny life is. How sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to be exactly what we needed." "Do you really believe that?" "I do. Not that I'm glad Linda cheated on me, but I'm glad it led me here. To you, to this life we've built together." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised me. "I have a confession to make." I looked down at her, concerned by her serious tone. "When we first started dating, Margaret told me the whole story about you and Linda. I almost didn't go out with you again." "Why?" "Because I was afraid you were looking for someone to fill Linda's place instead of looking for me. But then I realized that you weren't trying to replace her or recreate what you'd had. You were building something completely new." I am. I know. And that's when I knew I could fall in love with you safely. Because you weren't carrying around a ghost of what used to be." As the sun disappeared behind the trees and the first stars began to appear, I thought about all the people who had played a role in bringing me to this moment. Linda, who had loved me as much as she was able but had needed something different from life. Bill, who had made selfish choices but had ultimately learned from them. Margaret, who had kept us all connected to each other through the worst of times. And Sarah, who had seen past my wounded history to the man I was becoming. It had taken almost 5 years, but I finally understood that my story with Linda wasn't a tragedy. It was just the first chapter of a longer story about learning to love authentically, to forgive completely, and to build a life based on who you really are rather than who you think you should be. The betrayal had been real and the pain had been real, but so was the growth that came after. So was the love I'd found with Sarah, built on honesty and acceptance rather than compromise and resentment. As we packed up our picnic and headed home under a sky full of stars, I felt grateful for every twist and turn that had led me to this place. Not just the good moments but the difficult ones too. All of it had been necessary to make me the man I'd become, to teach me what I really needed to know about love and life and second chances. Sometimes the ending you get isn't the ending you planned for. Sometimes it's better. Thank you for listening to my story. If you had a similar experience, share it in the comments. And also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.